God, we've really fully gone down the rabbit hole on setting up a diff for an A86, and welcome back to Celica, my 1977 Toyota Celica, where today we were planning to take it for a test drive and really show you guys what that's all about. But a few things sprung up at the dyno, so we're gonna get to fixing her before we could do any driving. Connie has been a bit of a fighter when it comes to coolant leaks, oddly enough. We did have some things that we had left loose, which would explain why they were leaking, but after running it really hard on the dyno, we did notice that it was weeping from a couple of places. On this side of the motor, you can see that there's coolant sort of running down above the oil filter here, and we've traced it up to what we think is the upper water neck, which has like a non-OE flange on it, and it doesn't have an OE. Oh, we did put in the OE seal, didn't we, Pete? But it doesn't really seal the whole flange properly.
We're going to find out, DP. I don't remember what we did.
Yeah, so we're thinking that's where it's leaking from because that's not an OE piece. So over on this side, we have a trickle of coolant sort of running down the side of the upper oil pan area, and it's not easy to trace it up, but because there's no coolant lines on this side of the motor, we are thinking it must be coming from underneath the timing belt cover where the water pump lives. Well, we think we've narrowed it down to the leak being from this upper water neck, which is not the OEM piece. This is something that we made at Vibrant Performance when we did the whole cooling system for the car. And we used the OE gasket on here, but what we didn't do is add any like sealant to the gasket. And we're thinking just this style gasket on a non-OE flange just wasn't making a good seal. It was leaking out there and dribbling down that side, and it was also running through a little opening behind the timing belt, sort of on the underside of the lip of the cylinder head, and then dripping down on this side. We kind of were able to visually trace that route out. Which
is why we thought it was the water pump, but it wasn't.
Right, so that's why we took the cover off. The water pump's not leaking. It does appear all to be coming from that one spot, so we're just gonna make sure we seal this up properly, torque it all down nice and tight, and we should be good to go. Just topping up the coolant system now that we've fixed that leaky upper water neck, and we're gonna do it the old school way, because not everyone has a fancy airlift system like we do, and this is a great way to create a high point in your cooling system with this Lyle funnel. Comes with a bunch of adapters that fit up to different size radiator cap inlets. And you just keep adding coolant until you have a bunch in the funnel here, and then you run the car up to temperature and it'll burp itself as long as this is the highest point in the cooling system. On to the next job up front here, and that is the engine mounts, which may seem like a strange one to you, but if you look very closely, this Cusco hardened rubber mount in my right hand is 1 centimeter shorter than this OEM mount in my left hand, and the OEM one obviously uses softer rubber as well. So I've decided to go back to the OE mounts for two reasons. One is less NVH, so less vibration from the engine into the cabin, because again, I'm wanting to drive this car on the street and enjoy it. And with these in here, there's quite a lot of vibration, especially like sitting at a stop sign while idling. It's just like, the whole car is just kind of shaking. So I'm hoping this will help reduce that. But we also actually want the added height, which seems counterintuitive. Normally you want to lower an engine for lower center of gravity, but in our case, we want to raise the engine because it fixes our pinion angle on the front half of the drive shaft. So this is solving two problems in one. I'm gonna give a very scientific test of the engine mounts here. Oh yeah, look at that. We have engine movement now, where before it was like, I could not move the engine at all. So that should definitely reduce NVH, and we've already looked underneath it. It does give us much more adjustability for pinion angle, so we'll be able to get that dialed in perfectly. This is, of course, our 6.7-inch A86 Zenki GTS rear end, and we completely rebuilt this quite early on in the build process. If you go back to, I think, season 2, you'll find an episode, or maybe several episodes, of us rebuilding this rear axle. And instead of doing the rational thing and like taking this third member to an expert who builds these day and night, I decided to do it myself. We went through the whole process, followed the factory service manual as closely as we could, and everything appeared to be in spec, but it is now making some noises that suggest I did something wrong. So basically what happens is when I start to coast or brake, so I'm not accelerating, so the gears are no longer under load, it makes some terrible clunking noises, almost like a rattling noise when it's really light deceleration, but in certain circumstances, it's like a really bad clunk, 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 clunk noise. Like we thought, oh, maybe the nut came loose on the end of the pinion here. We checked that, the nut is not loose. So something internally is just not right. So what we're gonna do is pop the third member out of here. Third member is out, and just inspecting the diff, the gears actually look fine, both on the pinion and on the ring. So at least those haven't been chewed to death. I was kind of worried that maybe they were because I got the backlash all wrong. However, we don't have our gear paint, so I can't mark that now to check gear engagement, but it seems to me the bigger problem is back here where we set the pinion preload using that weir solid spacers and then some shims. You should have preload of around 15 inch-pounds measured with a tool like this, which we did do on assembly, but now
we did?
Well, we did measure it when we were assembling it, but I don't remember what number we got to, but now I can see when we do this we have very little preload, like 2 maybe 3 inch-pounds, and you should have more like 15, I think. So
closer to 15, yeah.
This is definitely way out of spec. It's way too loose. Getting a closer look at the pinion here, and everything looks good, and there's no play here at all. So it does have a little bit of preload. Like we measured, it's got 3 inch-pounds of preload in it, so I don't think the bearing could have been hammered at all because it does have that little bit of preload to protect it. So I think that this is still way out of spec and needs to be dealt with.
Check out this pro spec setup here with the bolt.
That's a tip from CM Auto House on YouTube, who's an AE86 specialist. We saw him do it, so it must be legit. There she goes. And there she be. So there's your weir solid spacer, and you can see there is, well, it doesn't want to come off because it's just stuck on with oil, but there is a very thin shim there. Digging a little deeper here, we can see we actually had 2 shims on there, an 8 thou and a 7 thou, so together they made 15 thou. Well, we borrowed a giant bag of shims from our buddy Pat Sear from Sears Garage Works, who's built a million of these 6.7 inch Toyota rear ends. We found one that we think was the right spec. It was like a 11 thou, and once you get her going, you can see it's right around 17 inch-pounds, which is slightly tight, but in our experience, once the bearings are not in our experience really, in other people's experience, as the bearing seats properly, it's going to loosen up a bit. So we think that's going to put us right in the correct spec. Well, after a lot of back and forth and consulting with our buddy Pat Sear from Sears Garage Works and looking at videos and charts, and my God, we've really fully gone down the rabbit hole on setting up a diff for an A86. And I think now we're as close as we're going to get. It's still not perfect, but on the acceleration side, we have really good contact between the gears. It's quite well centered. I wouldn't mind if it was a little bit deeper, but overall, I'm quite happy with how it looks on the acceleration side. On the coast side, we've got good contact, but it's quite far down toward the heel. But as soon as we try to fix that, it negatively affects the pattern on the acceleration side. And we've got backlash within spec. We've got pinion preload on the tight side of spec, which is kind of the opposite of how we had it before. It was really loose before, now we've tightened it all up. With the diff installed, it's now time to install the axles, and we are making a change in that area. This is a panic-made axle, which is significantly stronger than the OEM axles. If you know much about A86s, you know that they have notoriously weak axles. I think they tend to fail here where they taper down, or the splines actually twist under power. And that's typically something that happens when you say beam swap your A86 or put something else in it that's more powerful than the 4AG. I don't know if they break axles with the 4AG, but I know with the beams they do, which is why I want to go to these. I was just kind of risking it on the OE axles before, but these are made of a proprietary metal. They're much stronger, and you can see we also swapped over our longer ARP wheel studs. And oh, by the way, they also make these for the 7.5-inch Toyota rear end or the first gen Mazda RX-7 as well. For diff fluid, we are using Valvoline's full synthetic 75W90, which contains limited slip additive, which is very valuable when you've got a clutch type diff like this one, which does lock very aggressively, especially when you're making like slow turns. It'll kind of go clunk, 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 clunk. So this will help, ease some of that. If you add more slip additive, you'll get less lockup. So it does reduce the effectiveness of the lock. So you want the right balance, basically. So we're going to try this in its normal formulation, and if we need to add more friction modifier, we can do that later. But we've used this in our FRS, which also had a Tomei clutch type LSD, and it worked really well. So I'm pretty confident this is going to be a good fit for this diff, since it's also a Tomei clutch type.
And look how easy it is to fill the EP with this flex fill.
You cannot beat the flex fill container. It is pure genius.
It is genius.
And
look at this, done.
Look at that, look at that. And speaking of Valvoline, whose logo I will now uncrush, we're actually going to Grid Life Midwest with Valvoline. So if you want to see Connie in the wild at the racetrack, maybe even get a ride along with me or Pete if the car is in we're trying hard to get it ready for the track, but it'll be there one way or the other. And it'll be in the Valvoline area with all of their other, sponsored cars. So come see us there if you're in the area. The diff all wrapped up, we are moving on to another job in the rear end, and that is actually swapping out the rod ends on the upper links. I don't know if I ever fully explained what was going on there, but when we converted this car to Technotoy Tuning's a 4-link equal length setup, including those boxes in the rear seat, we did that to get the car lower. And that system does allow you to run the car lower without the upper links hitting on the chassis. But we also moved the axle back a lot, as we explained earlier, because we wanted to get the wheels centered in these custom fender flares. And in doing that, we basically reached the thread engagement limit on the upper links. But guess what? They make these with a longer shank. So we're just gonna swap these in, and we'll have a ton of thread engagement, and we'll be totally safe. So thank you, Technotoy Tuning, for your support. You guys have been awesome on this whole build. Like, as you see, we've converted the whole rear end to their stuff, and it did make doing the alignment remarkably easy because of how adjustable it all is. So we are quickly bench bleeding this original style master cylinder for the Celica. This is a 13/16 master cylinder. I currently have a 1-inch master cylinder on the car from a 3rd gen Toyota Supra. Why are we going back to a 13/16? Well, basically I'm chasing pedal feel now. So part of it, I think, is pad compound, but we have a fairly abrupt engagement of the brakes, and I want to add more travel. And to do that, you need to go to a smaller master cylinder. So to do that, we've got to bench bleed this thing, and as you can see, we've like looped the fluid in here, and then we pump the cylinder to get all the air out of the system. And it's also interesting to see, like, you push it in, and then it kind of hits a bit of a stopper, which circulates the smaller rear line reservoir here, and then you push it in further and it fully circulates it, and you can see I got a couple of bubbles out of there. So you got to make sure you're fully depressing this thing. Just the small ones, just enough to make your life a living hell. If you don't get
bleeding masters is a nightmare, and I think this is a really good, sure way to get like 80% there, right?
Yeah, and obviously we were gonna completely bleed the system once this is in the car anyway. Oh. All right, so I'm off here.
Okay, so let me plug this real quick.
Yep.
Okay. We're off. Oh man, that thing's dripping real bad here. Grab our rag.
Yeah.
Okay. We also want to spill this.
Yeah. There you go.
There we go. Okay, we're on.
Yep.
All right. Oh, Needs a little bit of tweaking.
Yeah, we did bend that slightly for the other master.
So this line here, unfortunately, is
Yeah, you can see
bent that way, and we need to go
rotate
straight.
it, you know, 20
So
degrees to
I
the
would
right
start, just give her a little bit of the massage.
Down. It's getting pretty close. They're threaded in nice and tight. They're not dripping. So all in all, that was
Look at that, man. We didn't make a mess.
yeah,
First.
pretty painless. We do have to tweak this line just a little bit because it's touching the paint. And we don't want to touch the paint, do we? So a little bendy, and we're on to the next step. Last but not least in the engine bay is a hood prop, which would normally attach from the hood to this side here. And somehow I lost that. I don't know how. I have two for an early first gen Celica, which are not the right length. So I turned to my friend Nate Gold, who runs a company called Foxfab Laser and Machine.
Look at that card.
Isn't that badass? They obviously would have laser cut that, but he used to run Fox AU2, who makes these hood hinges, and I assume those are now going to be offered under Foxfab, along with this hood prop. So there you have it, Foxfab hood prop in place, and to release it, you're just going to lift in the middle there. Down she comes, and we have a functioning hood prop. So thanks again, Foxfab, for that. And now I think it's time to go for a quick drive, see how the brakes feel, and listen to how that diff sounds.
That sounds like a brake drag.
That is the rear brakes dragging a bunch, which is like all we did was take them apart and put them back together again. So why it's doing that, but maybe because we changed the cable, you know, we were fiddling with the cable mounting point there.
Yeah, I don't think so, because those parking brakes were loose. So I think it's because we put maybe the axles or something. So
Yeah.
give it a
Yeah, it'll wear itself in.
exactly. Yeah. See, it's already fixing itself.
Well, the coasting isn't. I mean, it's not great. It's not really.
Man, I don't know. Like, to get rid of that, and now it's almost like an NVH
It
thing.
seems like
it
an
doesn't
NVH
have
thing.
like a lot of that like coast.
God, it's still pretty atrocious, but it's better than it was.
Yeah.
Like when I roll off there.
See, that's nice. Yeah, but see,
better.
once it's like 3,000 RPM is always where you get that.
Yeah, right
See
around
here,
picks up that little
and
bit
then it's
of
gone.
resonance.
Yeah.
Is that what? Man, that's so weird. As far as the brake pedal goes, I do seem to have a bit more pedal travel.
Okay.
So that may be an improvement. Yeah, like when you go to coast at a higher speed, it's certainly better than it was.
Right.
We've got random things still rattling in here because it's tin can, but
Yeah.
that's just 70s life, I think. But man, let me try a.
So if you get off of it now,
Yeah, like that's much better
so go
than
down,
it was.
now slow it down, and let's see, and then okay, now clutch in.
Yeah,
Yeah, and so it is driveline noise, sadly.
it is. Yeah, right at 3,000
And
RPM.
it's like that, yeah.
If you coast, it just sounds.
Yeah, it's just at literally at like 3,000 RPM is where you have that.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Still, it is an improvement over what
for
we had
sure
before.
it is. Yeah.
All right, come on, buddy. Just go, please, go. I appreciate the politeness of Canadians, but that's ridiculous. God, this road.
Bro, your engine's not even warmed up.
That's how you warm it up, PT. That's how you warm it up.
The diff certainly feels tighter.
It is tighter. No
what we've
question.
done is we've improved.
We have
something,
improved the diff.
but
We have.
Now it's like maybe it's not a diff issue.
Like
Maybe it's just like all the spherical stuff.
that could be part of it. That could be part of
Right?
it.
Like,
and
see how it just sends that resonance
vibration
at,
through the
especially
car,
3,000 RPM.
Yeah. That could be part of it, and it could also be like these are 35-year-old ring and pinion gears.
Yes.
See there, we get some clunking. That's your typical like clutch type diff clunk there.
Yeah, but it's not as, before it was like clunk,
Really
now
bad,
it's like
yes.
drr.
Yes.
So it's certainly
Not as
getting better.
dramatic.
Yeah,
Maybe a bit of that friction modifier has helped.
yeah,
Or maybe it's just because we've got things a little bit tighter now.
yeah.
I think we've been spoiled by cars with like Torsen diffs and sound deadening and, you know, modern clearances.
Yes.
This is definitely never going to be a quiet, luxurious car.
Oh, but it makes the right noises, DP. Listen to that. Oh my God.
The beams, it's all about the beams in this thing, isn't it?
All you gotta do is just keep this thing at like 4,000 RPM plus and you're living the dream, man.
It's good to go, for
You're
sure.
living the dream.
All right, guys, well, I'll call that quick road test a success because the diff is definitely quieter. It's much more tolerable. I'm gonna worry a lot less about it like just randomly exploding on me. I think we will add a bit of friction modifier to quiet the clunk down a bit, you know, that low speed clunk you get with clutch type diffs. But otherwise, really pleased with the progress we made there. And the brakes, the more I use them, the more I feel like this was a step in the right direction. And I think going to a milder front pad will really help things a bunch too. So we may not need to put that bias valve in, but we'll cross that road when we get there. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. That is a wrap on this episode. And in the next one, we are going to take you on a truly proper road test and a track test, because if we want to take this car to grid life and turn some hot laps with ride-along passengers, this thing needs to be sorted out properly to do that. So in the next one, you'll see road testing, you'll hear all the good Beamsy noises, then you'll see us turn some laps at TMP and report back to you on whether or not this thing is truly ready to go to an event like grid life.